who's waiting for the next presentation?
The next presenter is from Seoul koseta. Did you take part in the last year's winter seminar hosted by Seoul koseta?
Yes, I did, and we were so pleased by their warm hospitality, and we learned a lot from them for today's workshop.
Okay, the next presenter is Kim Min-young of Kongjin Middle School from Seoul koseta, and she will share her ideas on interesting reading in English classroom with storybooks. Please welcome her with a big applause.
People say that to teach is to touch lives. And that is one of the main reasons why I decided to become a teacher. However, after teaching at a middle school for a couple of years, I couldn't help but wonder, am I truly touching the hearts of my students? What can I do or what should I do to inspire them? That is when I started to reflect on my teachings and my lessons. So one day, I sat down, opened up the contents page for the first grade students, and just started staring at it. And then I noticed something. Out of the 12 chapters, there was only one chapter which was a story. All the rest of the chapters were either expository or descriptive writings. So I started to wonder, why does English have to be such a formal subject? Why do we always have to read about famous people or inventors? Why can't students read about a character that they can relate to? Why can't English be interesting? That's when I decided to do something outside of my textbook and came up with the topic of my presentation for today, which is interesting reading in the English classroom with Shiloh. Before I move on to my main presentation, please allow me to introduce myself. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Min-young Kim from Kongjin Middle School, which is located in Gayangdong, which is in the Gangsa district of Seoul. 50% of my students come from low-income families, and they live on housing projects that were initially given out to people with physical disabilities. And their monthly income is 1.4 million won per four-person household. So after school, these students hardly get any parental supervision or care. So I started to wonder, how can I channel whatever interests my students might have into English? And reading a book was my answer. I'm sure that you're already very familiar with the benefits of using novels in the classroom, but please allow me to mention just a few. First of all, novels allow us to be exposed to language that is rich and multi-layered by using language in its fresh and unexpected uses. And a good novel can be particularly gripping in that it involves in the suspense of unraveling a plot. And novels educate the whole person by stimulating the imagination of our students to develop their critical abilities and to increase their emotional awareness. And lastly, novels allow us to value people from different races, ethnic groups, and cultures. So I decided to read Shiloh with my students. Now, not only is Shiloh a Newbery Medal winner, it's also a coming-of-age novel about a young boy named Marty Preston who falls in love with a beagle Shiloh. And the author describes how Marty passes from childhood to adolescence by experiencing internal conflicts such as taking responsibility, weighing complicated issues of right and wrong, and making decisions. And I thought that this was a very appropriate topic for my students because they were in a similar, in line with the developmental stage with Marty. Since the topic of this year's koseta winter seminar was ways to narrow English divide of learners with different levels of academic proficiency, I decided to proceed my classes with my native English teacher, John. Now, during native English teaching sessions, students are not separated into their homogeneous groups. Instead, they come in as a homeroom. However, they are seated in groups so that there is always one strong student, one weak student, and other students in the middle so that they can work together or cooperate. And with John, students will have to use more English. And since he himself is from Chicago, he can tell us more about American culture. Now, let's take a look at the different areas of study that we focused on. First, we explored vocabulary, comprehension, culture, other miscellaneous activities, and we also focused on animal cruelty. Let's take a look at the first category, vocabulary, together. Whenever we were about to study a new chapter, a worksheet like the one you see on the left was distributed to the students. Now, I didn't want my students to spend too much time looking up the new words in the dictionary. Instead, I wanted them to focus on the plot and the story. So instead of having students rudely memorize the words, John and I try to use as many games as possible. So one such example is this: everyone's an artist. Now in this game, teacher writes down a new phrase on the board, and the first group to understand or to figure out the meaning and to draw an appropriate picture wins points. Now what makes this activity interesting is that students whose forte is not English but art can be the greatest contributor for his or her team. Now, the second game that I would like to mention is speed game. Now, this is such a famous game, so I don't think I need to go through the steps with you. Please take a look at the screen for the specific details. Now, what John and I did to make this more interesting or motivating was to play it 3 rounds. In the first round, students were given 1 minute and 30 seconds. In the second round, students were given just 1 minute. And in the third round, they were just given 30 seconds. But as we played more rounds of it, the words became more complicated. But even though it became more challenging, the students could participate more because they thought about it or they considered it as a game. Now let's move on to my second category, comprehension. Now, in terms of teaching comprehension, I used 2 different types of media. One was worksheets, and the other was using PowerPoint presentations. I would like to talk about the worksheets that I used to help promote comprehension in my students. Now, according to Elaine K. McEwen, there are 4 types of questions. For questions 1 and 2, students need to find the answers by reading the book. For question types 3 and 4, students need to incorporate their prior knowledge to answer the questions. I would like to show you some examples now. An example of question type 1 would be a question, something like, what happens to the weather on page 6? Now, all the students have to do is find one specific page in the book and try to answer this, which is very simple, and students at a lower level can all do this. Now, an example of question type 3 would be something like, why does the mother say the dog can't come into the house? Now, to answer question type 3, students need to combine what they know with what is stated. Now, as you can see, since question type 3 is a little bit more challenging than question type 1, it has been intentionally placed at the end of the worksheet so that the students will not be overwhelmed by the challenge. Now, why did Shiloh come to Marty's house on Friday is an example of question type 2. To answer this question, students need to look at 2 different areas of the book and synthesize to answer this question. Which promise is Marty going to keep is an example of question type 4. And to answer this kind of a question, students need to draw on their own experiences. Now, in terms of PowerPoint presentations, whenever I had to prepare PowerPoint presentations for my students, I employed the summarizer's 5 C's, which stands for comprehend it, chunk it, compact it, conceptualize it, and connect it. Now, when I was preparing the summaries, I didn't actually connect it because they were PowerPoint presentations, but you can find more about it on page 74 of your book. So after applying this strategy to prepare my presentations, I started to think, why don't I give my students a chance to use this strategy for their own learning? Since I thought that this was not an easy task, I tried it twice with them. I gave them 2 chances to practice. In the first try, I asked the students to tell me some of the important events that took place between chapters 1 and 6. And I just wrote them down on the board. And after students generated their sentences about the main events, I asked them to number them in the order of occurrence. And then I gave them a worksheet where there were 6 squares or rectangles, and students could draw their summaries and write a sentence underneath. Now, according to Cox, middle grade students' written responses enhanced when they drew pictures after reading. Now, in the second time that we summarized, I properly applied the summarizer's 5 C's. I talked about the 5 C's: comprehend it, chunk it, conceptualize it, compact it, conceptualize it, and connect it. And since we have done the comprehending part together by answering worksheets or by going through the PowerPoint presentations, my students jumped right into chunking it. After reading pages 71 to page 105, which is the conflict section of the book, I asked the students to divide the section into 5 different chunks. And as you can see, I asked them to just write down the page numbers. And then I've done the compacting part simultaneously by asking them to write 1 sentence or 2 about each chunk. And after they have done that, they were asked to come up with 1 or 2 keywords that would describe each chunk. And as you can see, students really rose up to the occasion and they were able to do it. And then in the last part, connecting part, I taught my students some conjunctions such as because, however, after, and before, so that my students could fluidly connect their sentences to come up with a proper summary. Now, like I mentioned before, since my students are all mixed up levels, I gave them a choice. For students who could write their summaries, I asked them to write their summaries. But for students who still thought that this was a little bit of a challenge, I asked them to draw their summaries. So as you can see, this is a student summary of what had happened between pages 71 to 105. Now, enough about comprehension. Let's move on to culture. Like I said, John is from Chicago, so he really played a big role in terms of explaining culture to my students. Now, the story takes place in West Virginia, which is all countryside, but my students, they all come from modern Seoul. So John really tried a lot to bridge the gap between rural USA and modern Seoul. So as you can see, we did a contrast of the 2 areas. And we also talked about tractor pulls, which is a common racing sport in the countryside. And we also talked about babysitting, which is pretty uncommon in Korea, but very common in the States. And we also talked about hunting and owning guns and chewing tobacco or the Sears catalog, whatever culture that was different. Now, what was important in teaching culture was that students, after doing that, students could relate more with the protagonist, Marty. Now, in terms of teaching other activities, I did try to add a spice of culture into it as well. Now, this is an excerpt from Shiloh. It says, I fold the bread up, jelly to the inside, stick it in my pocket, and go out the front door. Now, this is a very traditional activity, TPR, I'm sure that I don't even have to explain what this is to you, total physical response. Now, but students really enjoyed this. Do you know why? Let me give you a clue. I have actually prepared a loaf of bread, a jar of jam, and a spoon. Well, I'm sure that you're thinking about the answer, but not telling me. So, yes, the brave students who actually volunteered to act it out got to eat the bread. And middle school students always seem to be hungry, don't they? So they really enjoyed this activity. And then this is another traditional activity that my students enjoyed, which is information gap. Now, two different sets of worksheets were given out to a pair. Now, for one student, they had two paragraphs, one with blanks and another without them. And the students had to read to each other to complete the blanks. Now, what was interesting about this is that students who couldn't even read actually spelled out the words to complete their task so that they could win points for their groups. Now, with a little bit of encouragement, everybody, just about everybody in your classroom can be motivated to be in the competitive mood. Now, let's take a look at animal cruelty. So the reason I shifted my focus to animal cruelty is because I wanted to give more chances to my students to express themselves, and I wanted to see what they were thinking. So I gave them a worksheet with 6 different animals, 6 speech bubbles, and they had to now express themselves in the points of the animals. Now they are animals who are being mistreated, and they had to tell me what these animals were saying. At first, I did teach them the negative imperative constructions such as "don't eat me" or "don't hit me." But after that, students could generate their own sentences. So each group was in charge of one animal. And after they came up with the sentences that these animals were saying, one person from each group had to present. And the rest of the people in the classroom had to listen so that they could fill in the blanks to complete their worksheet. Now this is an example. I'm a live creature. When you cut my fin, I feel pain. I want to swim in the sea and live with my friends. So you should let me go. Pretty impressive, isn't it? Now, after doing this, I asked the students to choose one favorite animal because I wanted them to create their own film. So I gave them a worksheet like the one you see on the screen. First, students were asked to brainstorm the characters that were to be in their films. And then I gave them like 15 minutes to come up with a script. And after doing so, this is what they have came up with.
Hello, we are Team Raccoon.
Hello, Jihyun. How are you?
I'm fine. Oh, I like your bag and wallet. Where did you buy them?
Oh, it's from USA, Raccoon. It's very expensive.
Huh? Did you say raccoon? Do you know the stage of making them?
Oh, I don't know what happened.
Do you want to know how to make raccoon bags? Now let's go to the scene.
Now this is another example of my students' work.
Hello, we are Team Chicken.
Hello. What's your name? My name is Kyochon. Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you too. My name is Angry. Angry? Angry bird? Yes. You're Kyochon. Yes. You look so sad. What's wrong? I can't play. Why do you worry?
Don't you think they're having fun? Now, students had a lot of fun rehearsing and filming their films, and I liked this because this activity proved how creative and ingenious my students could be. To sum up, I did start reading the book by providing a lot of input, to promote students' comprehension and tried various activities to maintain their focus on the book. And in the end, in my long journey, I think I found out the answer to my initial question. How can I touch the lives of my students? The answer was very simple. Listen to them. Give them control for a change. And provide them with activities where they can gradually depart from being dependent so that they can arrive at being independent. So, and give them chances to be creative and to express a part of themselves. So I would like to use this opportunity to urge you to give them a try or give it a try yourself in your schools. Thank you very much.
Thank you.